This podcast may contain disturbing content for some listeners. It's intended for mature audiences. Listener discretion is advised. This is True Crime XS.
The newly released tapes granting an astonishing look at the twisted mind of a serial killer. From Jack the Ripper to John Wayne Gacy, murderers who seem to choose their victims at random both terrify and fascinate us simply because they defy moral logic. It was the disappearance of an 18-year-old Alaskan girl that led police to unravel one such killer's astounding 11-year killing spree. ABC's Neil Karlinski brings us the chilling details for our series, Crime and Punishment.
You're watching 34-year-old Israel Keys describe over coffee and a bagel his strategy for hunting and killing innocent people.
Back when I was smart, I would let them come to me. Just remote area. Come go to a remote area that's not anywhere near where you live, but that other people go to as well.
The police interrogation is in Anchorage, Alaska, where Keys was being held for the murder of 18-year-old barista Samantha Koenig, seen here putting her hands up the very moment a masked Keys pulls a gun on her. He zip ties her hands and leads her away from the coffee stand, telling police he killed her, then left to take a cruise out of New Orleans before asking her family for ransom. Gruesome as it is, Keys wasn't done talking. In fact, the man who matter-of-factly confessed to raping and murdering Koenig left investigators stunned by telling them he's a serial killer.
There is no one who knows me or who has ever known me, who knows anything about me, really.
We did spend a fair amount of time talking about his crimes and his offenses as well, and those times were definitely very chilling to hear him talk about what he's done.
FBI Special Agent Jolene Godin interviewed Keys over a period of months, sitting in the same room with a man she now believes to be a real-life monster.
He was very meticulous. He was very organized. He definitely planned everything that he did.
Keys traveled the country from Alaska to Vermont, looking for people to kill totally at random and funding his crimes by robbing banks. The FBI has now retraced his steps, a long list of dates and locations since 2001, when they believe he may have killed repeatedly. They so far have 8 confirmed murders and rapes, including a couple in Essex, Vermont, 4 others in Washington State, and 1 more on the East Coast with the body hidden in New York. And he told agents something they'd never heard before, that he left kill kits or caches buried in several states, filled with everything he'd need to commit a murder. They were in waterproof containers or 5-gallon buckets and included guns and different things he could use to dispose of bodies. His strategy: to grab people in remote locations like parks, campgrounds, even cemeteries.
Every serial killer, including, I believe, Mr. Keys, are not crazy. You cannot be that organized and deliberate and fit any legal definition of insanity.
You might not get exactly what you're looking for. There's not much to choose from, in a manner of speaking, but there's also no witnesses, really. There's nobody else around.
Investigators say Keys is a textbook serial killer. Like other famous killers in the past, he took pleasure in the act of taking a life.
He talked about the rush that he got out of it, the adrenaline and kind of the high from doing it, and I think, unfortunately, I think he enjoyed what he was doing.
There is nothing probably greater than holding the power and control of someone's life and looking him in the eye and being able to control all of that is intoxicating to serial killers. And that's why they keep doing it.
Keys also told Agent Godin that he could relate to notorious serial killer Ted Bundy, who confessed to 30 murders before being executed in 1989. The 2 killers had similar methods.
It's very common for serial killers to have no relationship with the individuals they ultimately killed. Many times they will not do it in their own community. Mr. Keyes, Ted Bundy fits this profile.
Prolific serial killers choose their victims carefully, like Gary Ridgway, known as the Green River Killer.
But I thought I was doing you guys a favor, killing prostitutes.
Ridgway was ultimately convicted of 49 murders and confessed to even more.
Hottie plead to the charge of aggravated murder in the first degree, as charged in count 45.
Guilty.
Like Ridgway, Key seemed to enjoy slowly revealing his secrets.
I'm two different people, basically.
How long have you been two different people?
Long time. 14 years.
Keyes said enough to start a massive investigation, but he didn't tell them everything. Sunday, they found his body. He'd killed himself with a razor inside his jail cell. One final act of control. I'm Neil Karlinski for Nightline in Seattle.
This episode is part 2 of Victim 4.
In re-listening to the Deborah Feldman interview, you said something interesting, and that was maybe it wasn't specifically about Deborah Feldman, but you're saying that you think maybe they caught him in a lie?
No, I don't think they caught him in a lie. I think that he thought they had caught him in a lie. If you listen to what he's saying and how he's saying it, he's sort of going on and on about how even though something may have seemed deceptive, might have seemed like he was lying, it wasn't his intention at the time to do so. And then he goes on to say that the things that he remembers, like in his mind, aren't as clear coming out of his mouth, he's realized. And so to me, I think that the FBI is talking about one thing and he's talking about another thing. And it's confusing. A lot of it's confusing because of sort of what's been said and sound bites from the FBI. They said, oh, he didn't deny it, but you can hear very clearly that he did. Consider it from the perspective that he thinks that they found something that he has been untruthful about and that his deal is about to be like no longer valid or whatever, and that they think they're asking him about a victim. If you listen to that again, with that perspective, it changes everything.
So you think the deal with Deborah Feldman is ultimately he just doesn't want to talk about her there, but he's not trying to lie about her?
I'm not really sure.
Meg seems to think that maybe he was backpedaling. He was basically trying to cover up for the fact that maybe he had been inaccurate with some of the things he disclosed. So we decided that we were going to take a look at the timeline and alternative victims to see if we could glean as much as possible from this interview. Basically, this was to further the rest of the investigation and to find the bodies.
According to the FBI's timeline, this is mostly made up of like airline records, car rental records, and financial records. They say that he is coming into Seattle from Anchorage on April 1st. It's a round-trip ticket. The other half of the flight is on April 14th. So then from April 2nd to April 7th, he has a car rental out, 637 miles. April 2nd, he has a camping transaction for like multiple nights of camping. So April 7th, they have him headed to Manchester from Seattle on Southwest Airlines. And then a car rental in Manchester that has, give or take, 1,100 miles on it. And so April 7th, there's also a motel reservation paid out. And then there's the Manchester reservation picks up on April 8th. They're saying basically he flew on April the 7th, lands in Manchester, and goes back out on April the 14th. He rents his car on April the 7th, and then Tupper Lake bank robbery happens on April the 10th. So they've narrowed it down to only April the 9th for what they're calling the kidnapping and murder of the East Coast victim, which they also say is the New York body. And so where I took him there was, say he leaves April the 3rd and drive. Whose car did he take? How does he get across that way? I could never really make it work any more than I could get him from Tupper Lake back to Colchester, Vermont, which is the next transaction on April the 10th. So basically he left the bank and goes to Vermont. And all of those things to me then start to collide with this black spiral notebook of when he did work. And he names his daughter's half-brother because it's not technically his stepson, but I mean, it would be if it was legit. And then, he does have these other financial transactions that occur in there where it's him like buying postal money orders. Postal money orders and prepaid cards is how he dealt with some proceeds of bank robberies.
Well, he was sending them to pay off his credit cards.
Mm-hmm. So it's not all of it, but it's like chunks of the bank robbery. But to me...
Well, if I may, really quick.
Do it.
His daughter's mother had a vehicle of his in Washington that he never took to Alaska. I guess he had basically given it to her. And she says that at some point. So there's a car. I'm not saying that that's what happened. I assume they verified some of that trip because part of it was he took his child camping. And so that's where it kind of made it hard for me to believe he had left any earlier than the 7th.
So if he did have a car, who was on the possibilities list? Lucera Jimenez disappeared after leaving her school in West Valley, Utah on April 7, 2009. Authorities believe she left of her own accord. Few details are available in her case. Lucera was 14 years old. She was 4'10" and weighed 150 pounds. She had black hair and black eyes. Jimmy Lee Brantley was 26 years old. He was last seen in the Destin, Florida area around April 5, 2009. He may have traveled to New Orleans, Louisiana. He's 6 feet 2 inches tall, 180 pounds. He has short brown hair and blue eyes. He has multiple tattoos, including a black skull on the middle of his back that is not completely filled in. On his left arm, he had a heart tattoo that had a woman's name and initials on the heart, possibly JR. There may have been fire around the heart. Jimmy may have attempted to have the name removed or covered, so the heart, banner, and name may appear distorted. He has multiple scars on his chest, head, neck, and abdomen. Jennifer Lynn Rieger went missing from Portland, Oregon in approximately mid-March 2009. She was last seen on March 13th. Few details are available in her case. She's described as a Caucasian female, 5 foot 6 inches tall, 110 pounds. She was 41 years old. She has auburn hair and blue eyes. Peter Dennis O'Brien was last seen in Boise, Idaho on April 2nd, 2009. He dropped his 2 young sons off at his ex-wife's house that day. He was supposed to pick them up 2 days later, but he never did. He has never been heard from again. He left behind his cellular phone, wallet, credit cards, keys, car, and other possessions, except for his laptop computer and his passport. He also left his apartment unlocked. Prior to his disappearance, O'Brien paid his apartment's rent for April. It's uncharacteristic of O'Brien to leave without warning. He enjoys hiking, particularly in Camel's Back Park, and authorities looked into the possibility that he went for a hike and got lost or hurt. They also investigated the theory of suicide, but found no evidence to support it. O'Brien's ex-wife stated she hadn't seen any indication that he was depressed prior to his disappearance. She described their relationship as strained. Police don't believe he left the country, as his passport has not been used, but they think he could have walked away from his life and traveled elsewhere within the United States. O'Brien was having personal problems as well as financial problems at the time of his disappearance. O'Brien worked as an audio editor for films at the time of his disappearance. He was born in Wellington, New Zealand, and has lived in several places around the world throughout his life. He lived in New York as a child, moved to Australia, and graduated from the Australian Film, Television, and Radio School there. He moved with his wife and children to the United States in 2000, and they were living in Vermont when his marriage ended and his wife moved to Boise. His sister and brother live in Australia. O'Brien has been living in Los Angeles, California until about 7 weeks before his disappearance, when he moved to Boise to be closer to his children. He is described as a dedicated father who adored his sons. He has played the saxophone in a professional jazz band and is also a good cook. His case remains unsolved.
Now, you said that it's airline records, and I'm not for sure about that trip, but you have to be careful. I have to be careful and watch for when it says that there was a credit card statement indicating there was a charge, because that's not the same as an airline record. That just means he bought the ticket. It doesn't necessarily mean he got on the flight. Of course, I'm not sure the airline would even say if he had gotten on the flight or not. There was a possibility that there could have been a vehicle for him to use.
Well, if there's a possibility of a vehicle, I know what you're saying about the airline records versus the credit card statements. And I've looked at that a couple of different times. There's some problems with the earlier ones. They're impossible to track down. But here's the pattern. In the earlier ones where I can pretty clearly see what is his alibi, he doesn't go to the same place that he bought the ticket for. That's what makes no sense. We can verify him in New Hampshire, theoretically, because he picks up a rental car there, and because he robs the Tupper Lake Bank.
Right. And so so let's say, I'm not sure if you're saying he flew out or he didn't. I'm saying, even if you say, like, let's say he didn't take that flight, like, there's not a victim. Like, that's the crazy thing to me. Is like, none of the people who are missing and continue to be missing now, I haven't really delved into cases that might have been closed between, the point in time where these interrogations are happening and now, but there's not another victim.
We were looking for cases that might have an anomaly, and I found one, and then another one. Jennifer Lynn Rieger's case had a shifting date of last contact that sort of fit, but there were two cases that caught my eye. Originally, Meg liked the Salt Lake City victim, and I liked Awilda Marrero. Salt Lake City had come up numerous times, and it was one of those things where when it said he was in Salt Lake City, he tended to be in New Hampshire, and vice versa. But we're going to address that with a different victim later.
Awilda Marrero was last seen in the area of Asnuntuck Street in Enfield, Connecticut on April 6, 2009. She left home in the middle of the night without her purse, cellular phone, or other belongings and without getting dressed. She has never been heard from again. Few details are available in her case. She was 43 years old, 5'1", 165 pounds. She was wearing a gray nightgown with jeans, a brown jacket, and no shoes. She has brown hair and brown eyes. Marrero has a scar on her upper right arm and pierced ears. She has the name Mike tattooed on her left buttock and the name Joel tattooed on her right knee or thigh. She was 43 years old.
Because there are certain markers, basically went off Tupper Lake at noon on April 10th. Like, he had to be there because there's proof, undeniable proof, that he's there. And so nobody else that's missing could be that victim.
Oh, well, there is one. There is definitely one. It changes slightly if we use a rule. It has to be an East Coast victim. Okay.
Well, I didn't limit it to that.
Right. No, I remember it. So technically there's two possibilities. Deborah Feldman is one of them, and Awilda Marrero is the other one, because...
Is she out of near Salt Lake City? Oh,
no, she's Connecticut. No, there is a Salt Lake City one as well. That was a 14-year-old girl named Lucero Jimenez, and I considered her too, because that was the other thing I noticed was he tended to be in Salt Lake City when it said he was in Manchester. That happened before. So you're not wrong there. I mean,
what is your thought on Awilda? Because go ahead.
Well, something's got to be wrong in the paperwork there for it to be Awilda.
The FBI felt like she was a good candidate as well, and in the note they actually reopened her disappearance to make absolutely sure there wasn't an error in when she was reported missing and when her last contact was. And it was pretty, I believe that her daughter was about to have a baby. And they, so obviously you would remember the fact that your mom went missing a couple days before you had your baby. But, maybe there was a mistake, but they double checked. And unless, they were just continuing to be inaccurate, there's no way it could have been her unless she was at her home that she shared with her daughter, and in the middle of the night she just left. I don't think she had shoes on. I think she was wearing a nightgown. It was really strange. So it was, it was something I could see happening in an Israel Keys case. Essentially, for that to work, she would have had to have been wandering around for a day until he got there. It wouldn't quite fit.
Right. And yeah, she couldn't. I agree with that. And then that was sort of the same, the other case, the Salt Lake City case doesn't work because of the travel timeline. He couldn't have been at Tupper Lake and on the Salt Lake City because she disappeared in the afternoon from her school, and they think she left of her own accord.
Right. And in that case, my thinking was he could have gotten to Tupper Lake if he'd flown, but he didn't fly with a dead body. So
she would no longer be the New York victim. And, that's sort of where I started thinking, well, maybe he described his open range situation. Maybe he killed multiple people.
Right, but who are they? Because there's literally no one else. And that's where
total for that whole time period, like if we take from when he's down here from Anchorage to the time that the bank robbery occurs and right after, there's only 12 people, and only 8 of them sort of fit because you can tell what happened in a couple of them.
Yeah, but no, they don't end up fitting.
Well,
if you apply everything to it,
you're
they
right.
don't fit. So I can't imagine. I mean, you're saying it was open range. Maybe there's more than one. Well, where are these people? Because they're not missing. I mean, I guess it's possible that, they were never reported missing.
Open range is a North American term. It's a noun describing a large area of grazing land without fences or other barriers. In the western United States and Canada, where there are open range laws, those wanting to keep animals off their property must erect a fence to keep animals out. This applies to public roads as well. Land in open range that is designated as part of a herd district reverses liabilities, requiring an animal's owner to fence it in or otherwise keep it on the person's own property. Most eastern states and jurisdictions in Canada require owners to fence in or herd their livestock.
So in addition to Awilda Marrero, I had looked at Arthur Greenwich, I had looked at John Hurley, I had looked at Alyssa McLemore. I even expanded it back and, tried to find a few people in March.
John Paul Hurley was last seen in Indianapolis, Indiana on April 1st, 2009. He was 5'8", 185 pounds. He has brown hair and blue eyes. Little information is available about his case. Anthony Arthur Greenwich was last seen in the vicinity of the Café de Mundo, his workplace, in the French Quarter of New Orleans, Louisiana, at 2:00 p.m. on April 2nd, 2009. He has never been seen or heard from again. He left all his belongings behind at home, and he hasn't mentioned any travel plans to his family. Few details are available in his case. He was 21 years old, 6'2", 160 pounds, with red hair and brown eyes. Greenwich's nickname is Tony. Some agencies may give his middle name as Andrew. Alyssa Angelique McLemore was last seen when she was living with her mother and grandmother in Kent, Washington. Her grandmother spoke to her on the phone at 6:30 p.m. on April 9th, 2009. Alyssa's mother was dying of scleroderma, a serious autoimmune disease, and on April 9th, her grandmother told McLemore that her mother's condition was worsening. She assured her grandmother that she would come home. A witness reported seeing her in Kent that day, near 30th Avenue South and Kent Des Moines Road. The area is frequented by prostitutes and their customers, and Alyssa has a history of prostitution arrests. The witness saw a green 1990s model pickup truck, possibly with Oregon license plates, approach her. She has never been seen or heard from again. Her mother died 3 days later, but her family was unable to get in touch with her. Authorities discovered that Alyssa's cellular phone dialed 911 at 9:15 p.m. on April the 10th, the day after she was last heard from. The dispatcher heard a woman asking for help, but the phone did not have a GPS sensor, and its exact location could not be determined before the line went dead. Authorities believe the call came from the Kent area, however. The caller has never been identified, and the phone went out of service a few days later. A witness reported seeing McLemore sometime before her disappearance with an unidentified male known to her. The man is described as Caucasian, in his 50s or 60s, about 5 feet 8 inches tall, and 175 to 185 pounds. He drove a green pickup truck. It's unclear whether he had anything to do with her disappearance. Alyssa has a daughter who was 3 years old in 2009. At the time of her mother's disappearance, the child was staying with her father, her mother's boyfriend. Her boyfriend describes McLemore as a devoted parent who would not have abandoned her daughter. She was unemployed at the time of her disappearance and very close to her mother. She enjoys dancing and roller skating. She dropped out of Kent Meridian High School in her sophomore year. She's described as biracial, black, and Native American. She was 21 years old, 5 foot 2 inches tall, 130 pounds, with black hair and brown eyes. She has a scar on her abdomen, and some agencies may list her race as Asian or Pacific Islander. Due to the circumstances of her disappearance, McLemore is considered to be in danger. Her case remains unsolved. Meg referenced a deal. There was talk of a global settlement, but it was much earlier than the interview I played related to Deborah Feldman. So we're going to go back to May 16th, and we're going to listen to how Tupper Lake and the New York body got involved. It's in the middle of a conversation that I'll link in the show notes about a global settlement. But I'm only going to play you the portion that relates to how he gave up the New York body in the first place.
Well, I mean, I'll tell you what, we'll compromise a little bit. There was there's some other stuff in New York which is in a way related to Vermont. So if Vermont needs to hear something, that's what you can tell them. Those guns that I dug up in Burlington that I had buried there for a few years. That's where the guns ended up, but on that trip it was a New York thing.
A couple years earlier.
Yeah, I don't remember the year, but it was, yeah. So we'll leave it at that and see what they do. But I'm not gonna start giving information nationwide until we see what happens back there. Sure. Because I'm just not ready for that yet. And,
sure.
And I'm not at all convinced. You know what? I mean, like, yeah. So far, I am happy with how low key everything has been. But that could change tomorrow. You and I both know that. So, and to a certain extent, you know, that's not to say it's a deal breaker if the story does break and you know, my name gets attached. Like I say, for me, it's kind of damned if you do, damned if you don't. I know that a lot of this stuff my name is going to get attached to anyway eventually, and you know, if it gets up to a certain amount of things, then it doesn't really matter what else I say. It's, you know, my concern isn't for my own reputation. It's for people that I know, you know, like my family and stuff, and they, you know, they've been getting threats and things like that from the public, and it's hard for them because they're all still convinced I'm innocent. So, you know,
your family in Texas, or family getting
here, like mostly here, friends and family. So. Anyway. Yeah, that's a concern I have. If a lot of things come out really quickly, you know, I don't want to. I don't want anything to happen to people I know, to my family and stuff. You know, like misguided vigilantes think they're actually helping or whatever. You know, as far as that goes, everybody I've known to a certain extent, you could say they're my victims too, because they're going to have to pay for this for a lot of years to come. So, for my perspective, it'll all be over pretty quickly. But for now, I don't want to do this plan, like, too much information too quickly. Because in the big picture, it's not really going to be that much time. Like I say, if things move forward the way I would like to see them, the way we all want to see them move forward, then, you're going to get your information. And the rest of it, like I say, we're going back a few years on some of it, and it's not nearly as time critical.
Well, we're working on your schedule. I mean, part of this is you want to move quickly. Of course, we do as well, but that's part of what this plan is about, moving on the schedule that you can appreciate. If we don't have a plan, things aren't going to move. And
well, they have to move.
But not on our schedule, not on your schedule or my schedule. The other thing about telling us about Vermont, I mean, we've made a lot of progress in just talking to you, because we've been able to talk to you about that. So,
right.
I mean, if you'll.
The reality is, if I hadn't said anything about Vermont, even with my computer, you probably never would have put two and two together. Let's be honest. So
I don't know. I mean, we're here talking to you because we know we want to get it from you, but it doesn't. I do have confidence in what these the FBI does. That's fine. Vermont, it is what it is. I already talked about it. Sure. It's not like I'm going to it's done.
Back out on what I said already or whatever. That's. But as far as anything prior to that, the specifics and details and names and places, there is more of that information, but I.
Mm-hmm. Sure. No, I know you need to keep the names yourself right now. You need to control that. Just then give me something from New York that I can take to them and say, here's what. I don't have to tell them any details because I don't want them to know. But I need to know that, look, he's told us something specific that we feel confident that your efforts are solving this.
Well, tell you what, for now, I can first of all, do I get a cigar today?
If it would help.
It'll help.
Okay.
I'll tell you what. If I get a cigar, like I say, there was those guns that were buried in Vermont, one of which I used in the courier kidnapping. I don't even remember what year this was, but what I can do is I can give you something. I'm not going to give you a body yet, and I'm not going to talk about anything that happened on that trip, but I will give you something that you can verify that timeline of when I'm talking about.
It's going to be enough information that
you're going to see pictures of me. Put it that way.
All right, we'll get that cigar. Water?
Yeah, thanks.
There you go.
All right, so New York. Don't remember the exact year, but there was a bank robbery in Tupper Lake. Well, that was me, and I'm sure it was probably the only bank robbery in that town for a while, so I'll give you like a timestamp or whatever, time frame.
And you're not sure, 09, 08, what was happening?
I mean, I know why I was there. I don't remember the years.
All right, well, start with that, I guess.
But anything other than the bank robbery, I don't want to talk about right away. Until we find out what happens with some of the things we've already talked about.
Well, the car is on. I mean, the car is going to be in process. That's moving forward. So we're gonna get you that. But
right, but that was that's part of the deal for the stuff we've already talked about, since that's what it's related to.
okay, I'm not worried about the car. We're going to get you in the car, or get Kimberly the car released. What I'm worried about is giving something to Vermont that not the details, because I don't want him to have the details, because I need to keep control. But I need to give them something that says, here's the magnitude of what we're talking about, and here's why it's so important. And here's, frankly, give him a pat on the back. Guys, if I can give the police chief a pat on the back about what he's done a great job and make him feel that he's a part of something bigger, that's going to get us a long way where we want to be. And once we get once we get that, we get some momentum, we're going to be right along the trail of getting where you want to be and doing it in a discreet way. So just give me something to pat him on the back with.
Well, like I say, that's all I can give you right now. You'll have, once you look that up, you'll have a time frame for that trip, and it was somewhat related to Vermont. That was one of the places I ended up and stayed for, I don't remember how long, a couple days on that trip. There aren't any more bodies in Vermont.
Right, you told us that. So. But I thought what you were going to tell us about that in New York, that there's a body in New York.
Well, like I said, there are more things I could talk about in New York, but there's I'm not going to give any specifics right now.
No, just don't give me any specifics, because that helps us control by you not even giving us specifics. But if you tell me there's this many bodies in New York, then I can take that and say we've got something solid.
There's one in New York.
Okay, so we can tell them that there's a body in New York.
Well, there's remains in New York.
But is it somebody from New York, or is it that's just where the remains are?
That's where the remains are.
But not a New Yorker, not someone who you took there.
I'm not gonna go into that part.
Okay. But someone, so Vermont's gonna, is it someone from Vermont? Because that'll pique their interest.
No, I'm not gonna go into that.
Okay, well don't get upset if we have to come back and ask you, right?
Well, like I said, we'll
Okay.
we can talk, but
Yeah.
Agree.
Male or female?
You said this bank robbery. I mean, was it sort of after whatever happened in New York?
It was on the same trip.
Okay. And you said there was something about a photo that we'd be able to.
The bank robbery, probably.
You're saying there's a bank robbery photo of you that we'd be able to confirm by looking at it that it's you. I mean, obviously you wear a lot of disguises, so I'm just trying to.
Yeah, I had a disguise on that one. I don't think I remember in the follow-up reading I did on that trip. Seems like the bank was. Seems like they didn't have very good photos, but honestly, I didn't. At the time, I didn't do a lot of research on things I did on that trip. I think the only research I had done on it was on airport computers.
But did you see
a little
him?
more careful back then, I guess you can say.
Do you remember what you wore? So if we do see some photos, we'll know.
I think on that one it was sunglasses and I think I had on like a hooded jacket and maybe some kind of hat. I remember I had either fake mustache or maybe fake beard and mustache. I don't remember which I used, but it was one or the other or both or something.
Do you remember then how much you got?
I think it was around 10 grand.
Was it just walk in to the teller? One teller, more than one teller?
No, there were a lot of people there. I mean, they were all employees, but things started out. I was gonna just talk to one teller, but then when I saw there were only a few people there, I just took over the place. I did take over on the whole place.
Okay.
You said you used one of the guns that you had buried in Vermont.
I had both of them with me. Both of the ones that ended up buried in Vermont. I buried them in Vermont after the New York.
Was there one that you had out and one you had on your person?
Yeah.
Which one did you have out?
Actually, it would have been the same. I think the one I had out was the same one I used in the one in Texas, that Smith & Wesson 40 caliber. And think I had the other one. I think I had a 1022 under my jacket.
Just one bank robbery that trip?
Yeah.
Do you remember where you stayed or anything on that trip? Hotel?
I don't remember the hotels I stayed in Massachusetts or New Hampshire, but I remember. I do remember it was the same hotel that I stayed at on the
Vermont
courier trip. Yeah. And that was my initial intention in Vermont was to just stay there and get the guns, check on the guns, because I had buried them in a box that I wasn't happy with. It wasn't very watertight, so I wanted to make sure they were still okay. I was gonna do it in a bucket, dig them up and rebury them in a bucket somewhere in Maine or whatever. Hadn't really planned on doing anything in Vermont for sure, but then, yeah, that night that I did the couriers, that was originally I was thinking I would go further east, like Maine or something, but yeah.
Do you remember where you flew in on that trip?
I think I flew into Manchester. And honestly, I don't even remember the order of states I went through. I spent most of them.
Did you visit family? Did you see your brothers or anything that trip?
On that trip, I can't even remember. I think I went to Maine. Maybe I didn't.
Tupper Lake is, was that on the other side of Lake Champlain?
Tupper Lake is not far from that reservoir where I buried the guns last time. Or, yeah.
So the bank robbery was on the same trip that you're talking about, that there's going to be remains in New York.
Yeah.
And anything about it? So more about the bank robbery. You went in there. It was a takeover. Did you park the car up front? Did you walk there? Did you have a rental car?
I had a rental car. It was a bank robbery. It was kind of a spur of the moment thing. It seems like there were, what was it? It was in the spring. There wasn't not a lot of traffic on those roads anyway, but I remember that particular day there was hardly any traffic, and so I just decided to park out on the main road. Just stopped 100 yards from the bank that was right on the main road, and had my car parked out of sight from the bank, and walked to the bank. And then, honestly, I don't. I think I only read 1 or 2 stories on that, and then I never checked up on it after that. So I don't know if they ever found out, like what car or whatever.
You only read a couple stories on the bank robbery or the missing person or the remains?
I only read a couple stories on the bank robbery.
Was the missing person, was that make the news at all?
Well, that was... There was some stuff.
So there was some news about it.
Yeah.
Okay. And the money, so you got about 10 grand. Was that, do you ever bury the money, or you just, what do you do with the money?
I did bury some of that, but that was buried in a different spot than where I buried the guns. And
Okay. And I didn't know if I understood it correctly earlier. You said you stayed at the same hotel in Essex.
Yeah.
For part of that trip, because you went back and you were checking on the guns.
No, that was the trip. I mean, that was the trip that I. That was, I think, the first time I had stayed in Burlington. And,
was when?
Was that trip?
The one we're
It's
talking
Upper
about?
Lake, yeah.
It's Upper Lake.
He went back when he killed the couriers to check on his stuff.
That's what I was.
There was at least one other motel I stayed in Burlington. I don't remember what it was called on that trip. But,
The remains, are they buried or are they in water or is it going to be retrievable eventually?
yeah, good question.
Buried?
There should be something.
Okay.
Remember the name of the bank?
No, I don't. I can, like I say, it's anything more than a year ago. Stuff kind of runs together in my head. I can. That's why it's. This is like New York and Washington are places that I went through a lot. So I can remember specifics and high points, but I can't attach dates or addresses necessarily. There's a good chance that Washington easier because I lived there for so long.
So you know the area better.
Yeah. And I had a boat in Washington,
So
like a lake boat or you
I had a ski boat.
Ski boat.
Okay. Yeah.
Do you ski?
I did for a few times. Yeah.
So I know you're not totally sold on this plan yet, but and maybe moving forward and what Mr. Russo set out here is Washington someplace we should start to see if we can work some type of relationship out, even just under the cuff kind of thing to see how it would work. Then maybe we could come back with you with. We know you're not totally sold on this yet, but this might be.
Well,
a way.
Washington. Reading this article, Washington might be a good backup plan for me.
So maybe the attorneys then could reach out and we could come up with maybe a little more detailed information for you. Would that be something you'd be interested in?
Yeah.
Okay.
Washington's pretty easy, as I said. Our U.S. attorney knows their use thing very well. I think the FBI here.
Well, we know both of them.
Nationally, yeah. There's Eastern and Western.
The way they divide Washington State is an Eastern District and a Western District.
And the guy who I talked to about that case was in the Eastern District of Washington. He used to work up here, actually, so he was telling me about that case. And so we've got relationships. We're pretty close with them. That, we trust them completely.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't want to talk about Washington right now. But
No, but I'm just throwing that out there that maybe that would be a good place to start with.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely something we need to talk about at some point. For now, my biggest concern is with Vermont. If they want incentive and corroboration on any other information I might have, then that's the trip they need to know about.
And I think this is going to go a long ways. And I think it'd be better if we could maybe tell them that it is or isn't a person from Vermont. They'd be definitely more interested in that.
Well, they're going to want to know that.
Yeah.
2009.
Yep. It's like straight up noon. I can't see the month. 10 October maybe.
Community. Yeah. First Community Bank or something like that.
It's going to be April, I think. Or was it like before?
Yeah, I can't tell.
Yeah.
It's all pixelated there.
Ground is still frozen in some spots.
Yeah, I think it's going to be April.
Okay. So, that, like I said, Vermont would really be more dedicated to our source, I think, if we could.
One thing I haven't really explained to you how this really works, when I say using success to justify, our requests, is, in some ways it's sort of counterintuitive. Like the bigger it gets, the more people we have on our team, the easier it is to snowball, into other districts and say, hey, look, you can't buck this, it's working. So the bigger it gets, it's almost like you're sort of thinking like, well, the bigger it gets, the harder it's going to be to control. I suggest it's going to be the opposite, because the more people we have on our team, we roll them right over.
I hear what you're saying, and I think it could go either way at this point, and that's what I'm kind of waiting to see. Mm-hmm. New York could turn into another. No, it won't be as bad as like what's going on in Vermont now. That's really public right now. That's what I'm concerned about. So.
Mm-hmm. Well, we don't have any. You haven't given us anything on New York that's anyone can do anything about. So,
right.
Which is good and bad, right? It's good because we got nothing. You haven't given up anything, but it's bad because then we don't have anything to follow up on.
Well,
it's useful. I'm not, but you got to know that the plus and minus is you've kept.
I know. I'm not going anywhere.
Yep.
What's done is done. So
it sounds
the only
like
thing that the only variable is how much of it comes out and how much we talk about at this point.
Mm-hmm. And it sounds like it would be difficult to even sort of get to step 2 of our.
There's so much to unpack from this interview that we were never going to get to all of it today. I'll link the rest of it in the show notes, but let's get back to the possibility that maybe it wasn't Deborah Feldman, or maybe there's someone with Deborah Feldman, for just a minute before we wrap up. Meg was considering that the person had never been reported missing, but I was looking at 2 cases that I mentioned to you that had anomalies.
But I mean, that was really lucky if that's what happened, because he picked people who weren't missed.
Well, I would look for murder victims in there, but that doesn't fit because we're talking about the New York body.
Correct. And that body hasn't been found. The other thing that made me wonder, about the timing. Okay. So the way he backpedals, it makes it seem maybe sort of like he's saying, well, maybe I didn't commit the murder before the bank robbery. And, I got things mixed up. But he actually says, I can't remember things like I used to or whatever. But then I wondered, well, why is that body in upstate New York? Did he really go drive somewhere else after the bank robbery and kill someone and then take them back up to upstate New York?
So in your mind, he's doing the abduction, kidnapping, rape, and murder, and then doing the bank robbery right after.
That's not in my mind. He said that's what happened.
Okay,
he said
so
he was amped up after it, and that's where he ended up doing the bank robbery. He says that the murder happened before the bank robbery.
You believe that? You believe his order of events is correct?
I don't know, but I did believe it. And then thinking he was backpedaling, I thought for a minute maybe that's what he was saying, it wasn't in that order. But then what confuses me, if I go that route, is I don't think he would have gone back to Tupper Lake that soon after the bank robbery to bury with a body. I don't see that as being a thing. My understanding is in the Adirondack, it'd be really easy to get caught. You end up going in and there's only one way in and one way out. I know it was a big thrill for him to successfully do what he did. If the murder happened after the bank robbery, well, who was it for one thing? But also, why is it in the New York body? Because he flew out of New Hampshire, I believe it was the 14th. So he would have left, after the bank robbery, he would have left New York. It would have been, weird for him to go back. I think he disposed of the body before the bank robbery.
I agree.
And in fact, I can't imagine it going any other way. I feel like he disposed of the body. He was so amped up. Having that part of the story, he tells that story. Well, of course, the FBI goes and they look to see who's missing. Who could this person be?
Yes, indeed. If not Deborah Feldman, then who? Carrie Lee Imani Heath was last seen at Mills College in Oakland, California on April 1st, 2009. She has never been heard from again, and few details are available in her case. She was 20 years old, 5'2", 110 pounds. She had brown hair, brown eyes, and was an African-American female. Heath had her hair styled in dreadlocks at the time of her disappearance and has a blue and black mark on her buttock. Buffalo, New York police are investigating Heath's disappearance. So I found out that this particular victim had ties to Buffalo, New York. And earlier that year, according to the campus newspaper, 40 students were locked out of their classes after the last day to add classes on by a glitch in the financial aid office. From the Campanile newspaper on March 2, 2009, 40 students withdrawn from class without notice. On Wednesday, February 4th, 40 students were suddenly dropped from all of their classes and told that they were no longer enrolled at Mills College. Because this date was the add deadline for courses, these students needed to petition a Mills committee in order to be reinstated. Junior Danishta Rivero was one student to experience what the M Center calls withdrawal without notice. I found out I had been withdrawn when I did not have access to the Prieto lab with my ID, Rivero said. I checked my schedule and all my classes were gone. According to David Jen, Associate Vice President of Student Finance and Administrative Services and Director of Financial Aid, students are officially withdrawn from the college if they have not properly cleared their accounts and confirmed their semester attendance by the check-in deadline. This year, that deadline was January 20th. Being withdrawn means that the college no longer considers them Mills students. They are dropped from their classes and their ID cards are deactivated. To clear their accounts, students must have paid or arranged payment for the upcoming semester's expenses by a certain date. Once they have done that, the system allows them to complete the online check-in forms. Rivero acknowledged that she didn't meet the deadline, but said this was due to some financial aid issues that prevented her from completing the check-in process. She said that because the M Center gave her a different answer each time she asked about how much she owed Mills for the spring semester, she could not make the payment arrangements necessary to clear her account and allow her to check in. She learned that the emergency bridge loan she had taken out in the fall had been reversed first for unknown reasons. When she finally did receive a definitive answer about how much she needed to pay, she said the amount the M Center staff told her was $4,000 off. Eventually, the mistake with Rivero's bridge loan turned out to be a technical glitch, and she received the loan she needed for both the fall and spring semesters. However, she had already been dropped from her classes. Jen said that warning letters were sent to the roughly 100 students who had not been cleared for and completed web check-in on My Mills about 1 week before the deadline. Mills gave those students until the Tuesday before the fall registration deadline to resolve the issues that had kept them from registering. Jen said that the M Center hadn't used the warning letters before he worked there, but that he instituted the system to reduce the number of students who found themselves in situations like Rivero's. Rivero, however, said that she had never received any such letter and would have taken action sooner if she had. I would have done everything in my power to prevent this from happening, she said. After finding out she had been dropped, Rivero said she emailed all of her professors to explain her situation. Most of them were aware of my financial difficulties from last semester, she said. They were all very supportive and allowed me to continue attending classes while I sorted everything out. After the add deadline passes, the M Center no longer has the authority to reinstate students, Jen said. He explained that cases like Rivero's have been taken to the Academic Standing Committee, the ASC. The faculty members who comprise the ASC meet every semester to review student records and coursework, and students must petition the committee when they need to request an exception to academic policy or procedure, according to the Mills undergraduate catalog. Rivero said she filled out paperwork for the Academic Standing Committee, including a written description of her situation. She also sent an email to Student News asking other students who had been withdrawn without notice to contact her so that they could help each other work through this situation. These other students, she said, included her friend Carrie Heath, a sophomore, who was withdrawn because of technical complications. She had already made a down payment but could not print the receipt, so they withdrew her, Rivero said. She lives on campus, so that was an added problem. Jen said he believes that all the students who were withdrawn without notice for the spring semester, for whatever reason, were successfully reinstated. At first, Carrie seemed like a good candidate, having possibly been tied to Buffalo, New York. But the further I dig, the more I believe that Carrie, although she is publicly reported missing on many major websites, may still be alive. So I needed to look for one more anomaly. And sure enough, I found one.
Frank Joseph Giza III left his home in Baltimore, Maryland in the spring of 2009 to travel across the country and visit music festivals. He didn't take anything with him and was not carrying any official identification. He was staying with a friend when they got into an argument and Giza left. He was supposed to go to music festivals in both Tennessee and West Virginia, but never arrived in either place and has never been heard from again. Although there is no evidence of foul play in Giza's disappearance, his mother fears for his safety. His case remains unsolved. Joey Giza was 23 years old, 6 foot tall, 150 pounds. He has brown hair, brown eyes, and a birthmark on the lower side of his back.
I was thinking maybe she went back to Buffalo, and I ruled Carrie Heath out years after I had been chasing that down for a really good reason. But then Joey Giza. So with Joey Giza, what was interesting about Joey's case is if you look one way, he's missing in June 2009. If you look another way, he's actually missing in April, and he missed some stops he was supposed to make in June, and that's why they have it pinned. And there was this letter that went home. So then I started thinking, would the killer take his backpack and his stuff and see this letter and drop it in a mailbox it's like the cell phone thing. He's taking that away, or he's taking the vehicles, he's taking the cell phones, like dropping a letter in makes it seem like the guy's still alive somewhere, but nobody's ever seen him since. And that one, because of his relationship to Bloomington, Indiana, which comes up again and again, that made me think, well, maybe he headed up that way. And there's these other reports of the killer hitting up these music festivals, and I know they're mainly hard to verify. But that gives us the only other candidate I have, which is Joey Giza.
So is the New York body Deborah Feldman? Or is it Joey Giza? Well, hopefully, we're going to find out. And next week,
one more item of note. What do we do about Jimmy?
We're going to Texas to figure out what the killer was doing between the time that he raped and murdered Samantha Koenig and the time that he disposed of her body while he was hanging out in Texas. Thanks for joining me today. Today's episode is brought to you by LabRottiCreations.com, LabRottiCreations.com. With the code CRIMEXS, you get 20% off one of their custom pop pet portraits. Be sure to check out their other merchandise at LabRottiCreations.com. You can reach me at truecrimexs@gmail.com or 252-365-5593. You can check us out on Instagram or Patreon, all at True Crime XS, or our website, truecrimexs.com. If you like what you hear, please give us a 5-star review on your favorite podcast app. Today's music is Indestructible by Noah Smith. Today's sources are included in the show notes. Check it out.
This is True Crime XS.
Right? Because he says, one of the stories where he's talking about multiple state lines of trying to get it to be federal jurisdiction, they landed on Deborah Feldman because she was literally the only person it could be. Okay, so to explain why he would have denied it, maybe he was genuinely surprised that it was the only person or that they were able to find her, or I don't know.
Well, this is the same conversation where he says, look, I realize that you guys know a lot about me on paper, and it's to my disadvantage.
What do you think that means?
I think the paper part is important. That's one of the things that made me think that maybe he drove. And I looked up, there's actually a Washington case that fits this, but not and Tupper Lake. That's the thing. That's what I'm saying is she's the only one. You can do the math any way you want to, but at the end of the day, he has to get that body to upstate New York if it's the East Coast New York body. The East Coast victim, the New York body. That's what I mean. He's not going to drive across the United States for the body. No, and that's okay. So that's why, like I said, if he leaves on the 2nd and drives all the way across, even then it becomes this thing where it's this ridiculous thing to think of him killing multiple people and how did he run into them. It's another one of those things where it's no, and here's why. Because that's basically what I did on this as far as list of victims. And, when I originally started doing this, I just looked at NamUs, but then I expanded it out and looked at some of the states that at that time weren't necessarily using NamUs and may not have uploaded things in here. And I still can't find a really good alternative candidate for the bot in New York. I have some speculation I can do, but the speculation is ultimately just that. There's no facts to back it up. So it's one of those cases where if you find the body, then you can start to confirm it. It tells you other things about the rest of the case.
I have tried very hard to speculate on who else it could be. And I can't find anybody without wiggling things to fit.
Well, even then, it's not just wiggling, man. You're fitting square pegs in the round holes to make anybody but Deborah Feldman fit, I think.
I just can't. I feel like it's really important for me to come to some sort. And I know we will never really know, but I have, I have a moment of clarity on things, and I haven't had it here yet. So I just don't know why he's so adamantly denied it, but she's really the only person it could be.